You know, when you hear the word Rolex, what comes to mind? Luxury, right? Status, maybe even a rock-solid investment. But that's just the shiny surface. The real story here is way more interesting. It's a story about solving one impossible problem after another. Problems in engineering, in business, and even in culture. So come on, let's peel back the dial and really see what makes this icon tick.
So let's start with this number, 32%. What does that even mean? It means that out of the entire Swiss luxury watch market, one single brand, Rolex, pulls in nearly a third of all the money. I mean, to put that into perspective, that is more than the next 5 biggest brands combined. They don't just lead the market for a lot of people, they are the market.
And that, of course, leads us to the big question. How on earth did this happen? How did a single brand get to be so dominant? I can tell you, it was no accident. It was a complete masterclass in strategy, in brutal innovation, and in some seriously smart myth-making that started over 100 years ago.
So here's how we're going to unpack this whole story. We'll start with what I call the Rolex paradox of today. Then we're going to rewind to the founder's original vision. After that, we'll get into the unbreakable innovations that really built their reputation, see how the company itself was engineered to last forever, and finally, track its incredible journey from a simple tool to the ultimate status symbol. All right, first up, let's just get a handle on where Rolex is right now. It's this world of absolute dominance, sure, but it's also full of these massive contradictions. And it's these contradictions that really define the brand today. Okay, so here's that paradox in just raw numbers. Rolex cranks out about 1.24 million watches a year. That brings in over 10 billion Swiss francs. And, yep, there's that 32% market share again. But here is the absolutely wild part. An estimated 1.6 million counterfeit Rolexes are made every single year. Just let that sink in. The demand is so insane, so off the charts, that there are literally more fakes being produced than the real thing. It's unbelievable. To really get how we ended up here, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Back to the founder, Hans Wilsdorf, and the very first problem he was obsessed with solving. See, back in the early 1900s, the pocket watch was king. That was it. It was seen as manly, as accurate, as the only proper way for a gentleman to tell time. Wristwatches? They were seen as these fragile, dainty things for women. But Wilsdorf had this revolutionary idea. He thought, what if a wristwatch could be just as accurate, but way more practical? What if it could be tough, a reliable tool for this new, modern, fast-paced world? And to actually make that happen, he made a brilliant business move. He packed up his entire company from London and moved it to Geneva, Switzerland. Now, this wasn't just changing his mailing address. It was a killer strategy to get away from these crushing post-war import taxes in Britain, and more importantly, to plant his company right in the heart of the best watchmaking ecosystem on the planet. But, you know, a vision is one thing. Actually engineering it is something else entirely. Wilsdorf now had to solve the huge technical problem. How do you make a tiny little watch tough enough to survive the real world? This next chapter is all about forging that legendary reputation for being basically indestructible.
Rolex really built its legend on 3 absolute game changers. First, in 1910, they proved a little wristwatch could be incredibly precise, earning the first ever chronometer certification. Then, in 1926, they conquered the elements with the revolutionary waterproof Oyster case. And finally, in 1931, they made the whole thing effortless with the perpetual rotor, a self-winding mechanism that just used your own body's motion. All of a sudden, you had a watch that was accurate, waterproof, and never needed winding. It was the whole package.
And this Oyster case, this was the core of that durability. I mean, it wasn't just a little water-resistant, no way. It was a hermetically sealed fortress for the delicate movement inside. By screwing down the bezel, the back, and the crown, you were literally locking out water and dust, the 2 biggest enemies of any mechanical watch. But hey, a patent is just a piece of paper. You need proof. So, in 1927, Rolex put its invention to the ultimate test. They found this young swimmer, Mercedes Gleitz, and gave her an oyster for her attempt to swim the English Channel. Can you imagine? After more than 15 hours in that freezing salty water, she got out, and the watch was bone dry inside and ticking away perfectly. It was, without a doubt, one of the greatest marketing moves of the 20th century. So by this point, Rolex had figured out how to make a product that could last a lifetime. But Hans Wilsdorf had another, bigger problem to solve. How do you make sure your company lasts forever? How do you protect it from all the pressures that crush so many other businesses? His solution was just pure genius.
He created the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a charitable trust, and when he died in 1960, he gave it everything, sole ownership of the company. You have to understand how radical this is. It means Rolex has no shareholders to please, no quarterly earnings reports, no threat of a hostile takeover. Just think about it for a second. It's a company designed from the ground up to think in generations, not financial quarters.
And that unique structure is exactly what allowed Rolex to survive its biggest test. In the 70s, these cheap, super accurate quartz watches from Japan just completely wiped out the Swiss watch industry. It was a bloodbath. The number of watch companies just cratered, from 1,600 down to only 600. An entire industry was basically on life support.
And while pretty much everyone else was panicking, trying to compete with cheap quartz, Rolex did the exact opposite. Because they were protected by that foundation, they just doubled down. They focused on what they did best, crafting these beautiful mechanical works of art. Their bet wasn't on the latest tech, it was on timelessness. A bet that people would always value real craftsmanship over something disposable. And boy, did that bet pay off. Which brings us to our final chapter, how Rolex went from being a maker of high-quality tools to a global symbol of achievement. How it learned to master the art of desire itself. So how do they do it? How do they master desire? It's really a four-part system. First, vertical integration. They control everything, from making their own gold to building every tiny part of the movement. Second, they control who gets to sell their watches through this tight network of dealers. Third, all that control creates scarcity, making sure demand is always higher than supply. And finally, they build the legend not with flashy celebrity ads, but with stories of real people doing amazing things, explorers, artists, pioneers.
And that strategy has totally changed how we see the brand. A Rolex isn't just a watch anymore, not by a long shot. This quote just nails it. It's gone from a useful tool to this powerful, enduring symbol that you've made it. It's a sign of success and maybe even a smart financial move.
And the ultimate result of all of this, the absolute peak of creating value, it's this number, $17,750,000. That's what Paul Newman's personal Rolex Daytona sold for at auction. It is the perfect, mind-boggling example of how the brand's hard-nosed engineering and its carefully crafted story have come together to create value that is just off the charts. Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. After all this, from the waterproof case to the foundation to the crazy auction prices, what is the Rolex legend really built on? Is it the tangible, world-class engineering that you can actually hold in your hand? Or is it the intangible, powerful mythology that the brand has so expertly woven around it? The real answer, of course, is that one simply can't exist without the other.